for whatever reason, it's become profitable to boost woke, and companies are going to continue to do that, even if they don't actually believe in the ideas, even if they don't know who Michel Foucault is. It doesn't matter to them. They just realize that if you propagate his ideas during the halftime show of the NBA, people like it and buy the sneakers.
Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith. Oh, Rob, how's it going, man? Thanks for being on.
Well, great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, dude. I love your work. Today, we're going to talk about some lofty things because I think both of us are in a similar vein, at least in this regard. You seem to be doing a lot of work that looks at institutions that are in the American West and kind of investigating what's going on with some of those things. And so you've done a lot of documentary filmmaking to kind of investigate those things. And I've been pretty much since the beginning of this podcast, really after that same thing. And a lot of what I'm doing is trying to find a descriptive way to speak about what's going on in the culture. And very often that means what's going on in these various institutions. So today I want to talk to you about the political world. I want to talk to you about the legacy media world, news media world. And then also want to talk to you about the Academy. And you've got even short films, but some documentary films that dig into all of those things that I'm just absolutely elated to share with my audience because they're really fantastic, man. So good work on that. But before we kind of jump into that, I'll just say this about it. My main concern with doing that is that there seems to be this institutional erosion that is going on that is creating, in my mind, a sense of polarization that almost feels like we're living in two Americas now. You think you got the red states and the blue states, and now we're not even talking about federal elections. And then there is also not only an increased sense of polarization, but there's also this increased, at least from my worldview and the people that I know, this increased sense of mistrust in institutions that is going on right now. And I think a lot of that lays at the feet of the woke movement. And so I'll dig into what I mean about that, but I want to be really careful to not just throw out those words. So I want to give some descriptions about those things. So we'll do that by virtue of some of the films that you've done. But before we do that, tell us just a little bit about Good Kid Productions and what you guys do there.
Well, man, I mean, I agree with you about the legacy media institutions completely clowning themselves, particularly over the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, it was already a problem before Trump got elected. Trump gets elected,
Sure.
And there's really just a profound, catastrophic dysfunction that begins infecting these institutions, all the legacy prestige media institutions. And part of what we do is critique it, right? Part of it's I don't like it when the New York Times lies to me. It's not fun when the NPR lies to me. It's not fun when the vice president lies to me. But at the same time, that also provides an opportunity. Right? It's an opportunity to try to build stuff that does earn people's trust, doesn't feel like you're just holding water for one of the primary political tribes in America. Yeah. And that you could speak about complicated, provocative issues in a complex way with high level of storytelling craft, so that's basically Good Kid Productions is the video production shop that I run with my business partner, and we've got some employees as well. I got my start as a freelancer, essentially like a freelance documentarian for a variety of libertarian YouTube channels, including Reason Television, which is the YouTube channel arm of Reason Magazine, which is the intellectual heart of the professional libertarian movement, whatever that is. Right, whatever that is. That's always on the verge of having legitimate political power in America. And then the success of some of the videos that I did for those channels got us the opportunity to create our own in-house shop, build a team, and build our own channel. So we launched our own channel almost exactly a year ago with this documentary defending Kanye West's decision to run for president.
Yeah.
Right? Come on now.
Yeah, you've got some interesting videos, that's for sure.
The brand is distinctive, even if the brand is not necessarily coherent or has a widespread appeal. I told my business partner, the brand is distinctive, even if we don't know if it's a long-term viable business project. But we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll find out soon enough.
What you'll see, but it will be a wild ride, and it'll be about a pretty eclectic group of stuff. So like you got Ulysses S. Grant from Incel to.
Icon, come on now. I mean, we could talk about all the great men of history: Ulysses Grant, Kanye West. I mean, come on, Glenn Lowry. Anybody you want to discuss, I'm happy to discuss it later. Yeah. But I think it's okay. So a collapse of a completely justifiable collapse of media trust, right? Particularly over the disturbances of last summer, the combination of just outright corporate media propaganda related to COVID and outright media propaganda related to Black Lives Matter. And we can get into what specifically I'm talking about if you want to, but the justifiable collapse of trust, the complete just ideological co-optation and intellectual mediocrity of a lot of these institutions. But I think there's still an unsatiated consumer hunger for smart things about important issues that are certainly going to have some political valence to them. Like we obviously have kind of more conservative libertarian politics, but that the political angles are justified and well articulated, but that occasionally we're going to veer from any neat political orthodoxy. Maybe we're going to say things that are going to upset people that, self-style like libertarians or conservatives. That's fine too. Sometimes truth doesn't fit neat ideological packages, right?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people that are thirsty for stuff that doesn't fit into this like kind of, infinite tribal warfare. And so that's what we're trying to make. That's who we're trying to feed. That's what we're trying to make for people. But I'd say I just gave a presentation yesterday. When I got started, I got my first fellowship for my first documentary. I think it was 2010. And at that time, I could feel these seismic technological structural shifts in media production and distribution, like that were just happening. So in 2010, like I realized I could make a Hollywood grade movie for less than $10,000 worth of equipment, less than $5,000 worth of equipment, because there just been rapid advances in video cameras and microphones and editing software. Like I could have everything that I would need to make a video that could play in the same theater they were playing Fast and Furious within 48 hours from Amazon Prime, to like in 2 days with less than $5,000. So the means of production became much more accessible. And then the means of distribution, this is 2010, so YouTube is taking off, but it's not what it is today.
Right.
And there certainly aren't a lot of these, like even the things like a Rumble or a Facebook or a TikTok or Instagram hadn't even really taken off yet either as a means of distribution for video content. Those were also exploding. So it made it easier than ever to make the videos. And you now had all these channels available to you that you could circumvent the kind of staid, stodgy, potentially politically corrupted middlemen that would just stomp on your dreams if you were trying to pitch them a project through traditional corporate Hollywood channels, right? Yeah. So that's also what we're trying to do, which is we don't need to ask anybody's permission to make the stuff that we want to make, right? We can make whatever we want, whatever we find vital, and we could take whatever position we want to take on it, even if it happens to piss off the people that run, most of the major media institutions in this country.
Right. Thus, you have Jimmy Carter, Kanye West, and Ulysses S. Grant.
Come on now, all the great men of history, right? But also you can make it at a level of production that's as good as anything you're going to find on Netflix, because it's gotten so much cheaper to make it, right?
Which is so true. So, like, tell me, what do you think is your most viewed video is?
I know that it's Silence You Part 1. So the first installment of my campus free speech series, I think is and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them just have to do with the mysteries of the YouTube algorithm, right?
Yeah.
But I think it came out at a time in which the campus free speech issue was at its zenith, in terms of people being like, yo, we're breeding a lot of authoritarianism among the cognitive elite. Mm-hmm. and people begin to worry, well, like if the students at these elite institutions are being trained that it's okay to shut down people you dislike, it's okay to romanticize your own psychological frailty and kind of weaponize it in order to shut down people you don't like. What's going to happen when they graduate from these elite institutions and then take over in the adult world, right?
Yeah.
And back then in 2012, 2013, people like, no, they will just grow out of it. Come on.
They'll become adults.
Right. You're every sophomore thinks that they found like the solution to all of life's deepest mysteries, that they're the first person to think that, well, communism has just never been tried.
Yeah.
It's great in theory, but not in practice. Like they're the first person to ever think that thought. But once you get out into the job market, the adults in charge are going to, slap them on the wrists and they're going to grow up. And like, why are conservative media institutions making such a big deal of the free speech problems on college campuses? And back then we're like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I think that they might bring this agenda and these like really, really, illiberal techniques with them. And sure enough, we got vindicated. Like these people, the same people that are at Brown or Yale or Harvard or Wesleyan or Vassar or University of Michigan, that were being rewarded for censoring their ideological opponents when they're juniors, are now like are entering in and taking over the New York Times or New Yorker or CNN.
Well, it's so interesting. George Orwell, who's also the author of 1984, as I'm sure you know, said that some ideas are so foolish that only smart people can believe them. So this is actually a historical thing that we always see, man, is that like that authoritarianism usually is bred in elitist circles.
Right. It got baked in there for a couple of decades within the institutions that were training the next generation of elites, and we're getting to witness like the wreckage that gets wrought by them once they start running the institutions of the adult world. Mm-hmm. Right. But the one other thing that I want to say is I think part of the reason Silence You Part 1 did so well, and this is what we always aspire to, again, to various degrees of success, is to take some issue that people kind of understand, but then attack it from funky angles, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not like, okay, fine. Oh, it's like, oh, so these guys are kind of libertarian conservatives and they're talking about campus speech. I bet you I can guess exactly what the next 13 minutes of this documentary are going to be like, right? Yeah. And what we want to do is be like, no, man, like this is going to go in directions, and we're going to tell stories, and we're going to make, arguments. We're going to attack from analytical angles that you are going to be like, whoa, what the fuck is this? Like, what is happening here? Yeah. And we're always trying to do that. I mean, not always successfully, but we're doing. Yeah, I mean, I was just editing a very ambitious doc this morning, and there are lines in it that I say, are lines in it that contributors say, that are going to catch a lot of people by surprise, that they're going to think that they know what they're watching. And then like at the 7-minute mark or so, they're going to be like, wait a minute, what is happening? So that's what you're trying to do, is like, at least say it with some creativity and some unorthodox storytelling angles.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. All right. So let's dig into some of those. I know we've done that a little bit with Silence You, but let's dig into kind of that first realm. Because again, your stuff, and I forgot to mention this up front, but I want my viewers to know your stuff has been featured on things like New York Times, The Washington Post, The Economist, USA Today. You were even on Adam Carolla's podcast. And so you've been all over the place. Your stuff has been featured in a lot of places, and I'm really amazed at kind of the caliber of talent actually that you can that you bring on as guests whenever you have one-on-one conversations, because you guys do that too. People like Glenn Lowry, who's a dude just like he's my spirit animal. I love that dude.
That's one of my. He's in the documentary that I'm working on right now.
Okay. Can you tell? By the way, let's just sidestep for just one moment, real quick. Can you tell me what you're working on? Is that secret?
It's I don't want to give away too much, but it's about an enormous scandal at a very prominent American institution that I think encompasses every important trend in American intellectual life in 2021. Okay. Like there's 5 or 6 very interesting things that are happening with the way that what I want to say. It encompasses cancel culture, it encompasses identity politics, it encompasses accusations of racism, it encompasses the kind of corruption of the institutions that we trust to tell us the truth. It's all that happens in this very specific scandal, this very specific story that most people, that if most people don't know, but should be compelled by within the first 12 seconds of the documentary. That's what I'll say. And it has some of my favorite people in it. I mean, Glenn, I don't know if this is going to be interesting, but there's ways in which Glenn, the fact that I've gotten a chance to work with Glenn Loury, this professor of economics at Brown University, as much as I have, I think he's been in like 6 or 7 of the documentaries we've done. I've gotten a chance to do an interview show with him. And he is, I think it's fair to say he is the single most eloquent person I've ever met in my life. I'm like, he might be the most eloquent person in the English speaking world. Like people can just go watch Blogging Heads. They can go watch the Glenn Show. Like his ability to formulate sentences in real time about complicated issues and boil them down to their essence and make some incredible point about whatever that issue is, improvisationally is miraculous, right? It's divine. I should not have access to him, right? I'm just a guy. We're just some dudes, right? We got a YouTube channel, we got a Facebook channel. I have 724 Instagram followers. I'm just a guy. I shouldn't have access to him. But Glenn, to a certain extent, is not as famous as he ought to be. He's not as difficult 100%. To access as he ought to be, because all he does is flame woke orthodoxy, right? Yeah. His exact inverse is a guy like Ibram X. Kendi, who we've done a documentary about, who's a transparent intellectual mediocrity. All he does is recite the 7 staid talking points. Yeah. He was
racism is racist. Racist people that are racist.
Right, that he learned in his sophomore year, right? Yeah. But he gets feted by all the prestigious, wealthy media institutions in the country because he happens to conform to this very particular political script. You can't get access to Kendi because he's too busy doing $20,000 an hour Zoom sessions for private schools in West Los Angeles, or too busy working on his new multi-part Netflix special, right? Yeah. Glenn should be on Netflix. Glenn should 100%. Be on HBO, right? He should. He doesn't, because all he does is just ruin these people's all he does is just firebomb their political orthodoxy.
Yeah. There's a cottage industry, and so he's too dangerous, right?
But he's amazing. And the fact that I'm able to get access to him, again, that's actually part of this opportunity that emerges from this kind of systemic institutional failure of the legacy media, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So let's jump into that. So we'll hold the media off for just a moment, but let's just jump into the political realm. So you did a documentary about one called Trump is Destiny. You also did one about Jimmy Carter and his campaign, and I want to flavor that just a little bit for my audience and just kind of tell them, and then I'll let you jump in who actually did the film. But needless to say, let me illustrate first that I think one of the ways in which we are feeling this anxiety, this tension in America is something that you describe in the film, which is, hey, if you, at least in the Jimmy Carter aspect of the film, you say, hey, if you don't like Trump, maybe you should like somebody like Jimmy Carter. And essentially what you're saying is maybe if you don't like Trump, maybe we shouldn't make the executive branch so increasingly big and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I would say there's a lot of people who I hope are out of the echo chamber enough to realize that the increasing scale of government getting bigger and bigger is one, first of all, an objective reality. It is happening. And then two, secondly, is an issue, is a problem, and something certainly this nation was not founded upon. And so it's undeniable that it is happening. Where we probably can have some debate is the pros and cons of such a thing happening. But there is, I think, generally speaking, certainly for me, so I can speak for myself, an uneasiness with the growth of the executive branch and how much emphasis we consistently put upon the president as though he is the new monarch of America. And I'm a little bit concerned with the fact that, I mean, we're actually, if we're not already there, we're going to get slowly but surely get to that place because the executive branch continues to grow increasingly in power and in everybody's mind as the biggest thing in the American electoral system, when really we should be focusing perhaps way more on what's happening on a state and local level. So what motivated you to make films about this, and kind of even what motivates you?
Well, I wanted you to so you said there's the Trump documentary though has there's two clauses in it, right?
Okay.
So you said, and this is funny though, because the first clause is Trump is destiny. And then I got invited after I went out onto a bunch of right-wing talk shows, right? Like kind of drive time, AM radio, mouth breathing, like exactly the kind of just like boring, predictable, tribal political radio that you'd expect, right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't watch the film and they just saw Trump as destiny. They're like, oh, here's someone else that's part of the tribe. There's the second clause in the title of the documentary is, I think it's why the reality television show presidency was inevitable, right? And we don't say I don't say reality TV show presidency as a compliment. It's not a compliment, but that what the doc is trying to say is that and I did it right after I think it came out in 2016. I think it came out right after he got elected, where I was noting that the idea that a single person serves as the gravitational center for the entire national political conversation is the inevitable consequence of trends in the presidency dating back 100 years. That having a single person suck up all the oxygen in the room is very bad for democracy. It's very bad for policy. It gives a specific branch of the federal government way too much power. And it's in direct contradiction to what the kind of founders envisioned when they built the underlying kind of legal architecture for the federal government. That they like back then, 250 years ago, they saw exactly that this could happen. They saw the temptation of making the president the great man, making him a semi-deity. And they built particular like mechanisms into the governance structure of America to prevent that from happening. But those safeguards have sort of been trampled over because there isn't enough kind of public pushback to kind of further annexation of powers that ought to be.
And I just want to insert this. In here real quick, because this is what some people don't realize, that because I think it underscores the brilliance of the founding of our country, is that there is some element of incompetence written into the foundation of the formation of our government. So the checks and balances idea is that these guys are not supposed to be able to accomplish too much, because we're not trying to make sure that they have too much power. So I know that's something we get frustrated with, and obviously we want returns on our investment. We're going to be paying taxes. We're going to vote for people, all that stuff. Yes, so yeah, we want that, but there is a certain sense in which now we've flipped that and said, yes, we have expectations on our political class, but we flipped that to say, now we want everything that we want to come from these people that were never meant to give us these things. And they were supposed to be perfectly not that powerful.
Right. And at the time, the line on Trump was that he is this historic anomaly, that he came out of nowhere. We've never had anyone like this. And, there's ways in which that's true in terms of just like, I think his internal psychological makeup. But what I was trying to say is in terms of he's actually the kind of inevitable, grotesque extension of a trend that had been propagated by presidents essentially dating back to FDR. Mm-hmm. Like, that he actually, if you look at it from a different angle, he's part of a lineage that is bipartisan and that stretches back a while. And what we kind of in the doc, what we attempt to do is kind of go from individual case study to individual case study of different presidents, FDR, Truman, JFK, and a specific kind of new attribute that they added to the presidency. An attribute that is unconstitutional and deeply unhealthy for a democratic republic, right? Yeah. But being like, all these different features of Trump that you're now kind of horrified by, we kind of did this to ourselves. Can I say one interesting thing though, which is back then it was still, we didn't know, like it was early enough in the Trump presidency, you didn't know how much of the formal powers of the president he would actually use, right? Because he got gifted all sorts of kind of grotesque, unconstitutional powers by his predecessor, Barack Obama, who everybody wanted to say was like clearly just this was a dramatic break. And we're like, no, man, like you have Obama, signing off on drone strikes of American citizens, and everybody being real quiet about that.
Yeah.
And like, if you think about it for a second, like this is probably insane that a single person can just rain death on American citizens. And so Trump inherits this like package of powers that were clearly not intended to be afforded the president, and it was to be seen how much he would use them. What was kind of remarkable 4 years later is how reluctant he was to use them. That the Trump presidency became almost purely theatrical. That the only thing that he really cared about was the media circus, was the storytelling aspect, was winning on Twitter, was winning the cable news cycle, and how little he was willing to kind of aggressively embrace and use a lot of the actual powers of the office itself.
Yeah.
And that actually is kind of like the next grotesque evolution, where it becomes purely theater. It's not even about power anymore. It's purely about the theater of the grand demon or the grand savior, depending upon your politics, and us just fighting about him in 12-hour Twitter cycles.
Well, this is where the Jimmy Carter thing comes into play, right? Because what's Jimmy Carter doing in 2020, which is just a funny title, by the way, is I love your approach here, because you're doing what you actually say is, oh, I know where this is going. And you kind of flip things on its head when you say, if you don't like Trump, well, then vote Democrat. Well, you say, well, if you don't like, that's where you think you might go. If you don't like Trump, well, then maybe we're looking at the presidency totally wrong. And maybe Jimmy Carter wasn't as bad as we think he was, because he was trying not to be a demigod. He was not trying to be a monarch or create demagoguery, which we blame Trump for. So maybe our problem is all of us looking so deeply to these people as our savior.
And so Carter was basically the only president of the last 100 years who really explicitly made a point to reject the deification of the presidency, and he got punished for it. He became one of these, the select ignoble few that lose their reelection bid. And he says in the doc specifically, like, a lot of people want the president to be their god, to be their king, to be royalty, and I don't want to do that. Like, I'm a simple peanut farmer, man. Like, and you could he doesn't have, there's plenty of things in his policy record that I disagree with, but in terms of setting the groundwork for a lot of the kind of more radical deregulation that happened under the Reagan administration, Carter had a big role to play with that. I mean, particularly deregulating the airline industry. Like, he did all sorts of things that a Reason magazine would love, but doesn't really get talked about, because the standard media narrative about him is that he's a mediocre failure. He's only a mediocre failure because he wouldn't play the game of constantly billing himself as the God, King, Savior, which Trump clearly had no compunctions about.
Right.
He's more than willing to play that game, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right, so there's so much more we could say there, but essentially, we're seeing right now this play out, right? Because, of course, because of the dishonesty of the media, we talked about how fascist Trump was, but we're seeing complete overreach by the federal government in a continued basis with Joe Biden in a multitude of different ways that are too much to illustrate, but not the least of which is a vaccine mandate that was unconstitutional from inception. And then we hear him consistently make comments like, I don't know if this is unconstitutional or not. And then all of us are just like, oh, Joe. And he's like, is that not going to pause anybody? And so, all right, so we're seeing right in front of our face the elevation of the executive branch and the repercussions of such a thing. All right. So let's switch to the media. Perhaps we saw right in front of our face just recently in the Rittenhouse trial, the most clear way that I've seen in recent memory, on par, if not more, aggressive than the way in which the media consistently covered Trump, but also to the way in which 2020 took place and how it became a political tool with Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. But we saw right in front of our face, yet again, with Rittenhouse, the media basically lie about this trial at every turn they possibly could.
But it's not just lie, though. It's also, okay, you get it wrong. You get it wrong because you have a clear ideological agenda. Yeah. Then, in stunning detail, your narrative gets demolished, right? I think the additional thing that stirs so much public resentment of these institutions is not just that the ideological agenda in building this false narrative. It's even when they get caught with their pants down, they don't apologize.
Yeah.
There's never
we get a double down.
That's part of also what the Russiagate the continued political fallout for Russiagate is because not only did they lie repeatedly about collusion, it's now that the Steele dossier has been like revealed to be a Democratic operation. It was unreliable and was deemed unreliable a long time ago. There's like nobody gets fired, nobody apologizes, nobody says we got this wrong, nobody says that we were carried away by hysteria.
They double down.
Right.
It's the Joe Rogan ivermectin thing. We get caught with our pants down because Sanjay Gupta actually has enough guts.
And it's like, yes, it is a horse drug. Also, the inventors won the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And they're just, but I think like again, I think that I don't know what Don Lemon's ratings are. I can't imagine they're particularly impressive. I think a lot of them have taken a hit since the big bad man with orange hair was ejected from the White House. But it's being reflected also in people's media consumption habits. It's like who under 65 years old voluntarily watches CNN?
Yeah.
Like I might have to get a little bit of the mind cancer when I catch it out of the corner of my eye when I'm at the dentist's office or at an airport. But like me and nobody that I know who's under 65, that's not like dementia addled and bedridden, voluntarily watches CNN.
Yeah.
Right. I only watch it when there's a viral clip of Joe Rogan owning one of the CNN hosts, right? Like they're getting to witness these titanic shifts and the power of in the media industry in real time.
Yeah. So I want to run something by you real quick because I want to save kind of like the really kind of philosophical underpinnings of this stuff for in a moment, because I want to talk about where we think all these things are coming from. But I want to run this idea by you and see what you think. I heard Tim Pool say this. You know Tim Pool? Okay, so I heard Tim Pool say this, that he doesn't think that it's just merely that it's not alone that these guys know what clickbait is and they know that outrage sells. It's not just that, right? Because they, like, for instance, CNN getting caught with their death toll meter, because they knew that people would do that, and then Project Veritas exposing that very overt trick. But it's also this. Tim Pool said that he thinks what actually happened in 2020 is that and probably a little bit before, to be fair, is that these media institutions that are in bed with the Democratic Party overplayed their hand. And they were so aggressively anti-Trump that actually what they did is they scared away their moderate viewers, and then they were only left with very far left-leaning viewers because everybody with common sense went away from those people. And then therefore what they have to do now in Joe Biden's presidency is they have to make a decision. Do we actually go back to actually being real journalists, or do we realize that now we're left with this group of people who are still watching us and we have to cater to the demands of these people who are watching us? And so it's 24/7 outrage, 24/7 Joy Reid being incredibly racist and all these other things. So what do you think about that? Like, where is this overt desire to lie to the American public coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I ultimately, though, if I have to choose between assuming it is, let me tell you, let me respond with an anecdote. And then I think, which is, I recently took my kids back to Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, to visit their grandmother.
Okay.
To go horseback riding in Malibu and to go in a pool, enjoy perfect 72-degree weather. So I went back, 2 weeks ago to LA. And then a year ago, we went back as well. And so a year ago when I went, the downtown village of this cozy little affluent corner of West Los Angeles that I'm from was completely plastered with Black Lives Matter posters, right? Everything, everybody, the juice shop, the gas station, the beloved Italian restaurant, everybody came out and explicitly expressed their solidarity for BLM, right? Fast forward a year later, like all that stuff was gone. All of it was gone. It all just like disappeared in an instant, right? And there was like shockingly little political sloganeering for any tribe when we were there. Again, this is West Los Angeles. This is like overwhelmingly kind of woke, progressive, self-satisfied, like affluent technocratic class people, right? And I did say to my mom at the time, I was like, what that revealed to me is how much of what had happened was fashion and not ideological, right? How much of it was chasing a fashion for capitalist purposes, as opposed to ascribing to some specific concrete ideological agenda, right? It's like the beloved family Italian restaurant and the juice crafters that sells $17 keto mojitos hasn't read a lot of Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo. It doesn't believe in like structural racism. It knew it had to signal its affiliation with that movement at that moment because it was good.
Yeah, so it was fashionable.
And like basically that's essentially what I think for the likes of CNN and MSNBC. Again, as someone who's not a particular I'm like not a media expert. I don't know their internal mechanics. I don't know their staffing, but I would assume most of it is actually money grubbing, capitalist fashion chasing, as opposed to a legitimate ideological agenda. You know, well, I don't know if there's comfort to be taken in that, but that's how I read it.
Yeah, probably not too much comfort there. I want to talk about the Academy because what you do in Silence U is really, really interesting. And of course, we already kind of talked about this with Glenn Lowry, and then you also have Charles Douglas on to talk about kind of what is happening with a group of people that should be about learning but are shutting down free speech. You know, they're being reinforced in their kind of unearned moral superiority and the way that they view things instead of considering other people's opinion. They are trying to shut down the public discourse of ideas, and this is most obvious in like and I know this is kind of a ridiculous example because frankly he's a ridiculous person, but Milo Yiannopoulos coming to Berkeley. But you think to yourself, okay, there's no doubt Berkeley's woke, Berkeley's just absolutely nuts. It's free trade, non-GMO, blah, 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 everything on every corner, artisan, who knows, artisan graphite pencils for everybody in class. But nonetheless, you also hope that in a prestigious university like Berkeley, this is a place where they're not going to burn and loot and destroy stuff and actively go on news media outlets and say, well, we actually think we should aggressively attack anybody that disagrees with us. I mean, this is what these people are actually saying. They were saying, well, we think the Democratic Party has been a little bit too soft in the past, so we think we should use violence to shut people up. So obviously, really stellar intellectual people and stellar work being done in the university. So
a point though, which is that I think sometimes what gets lost though in the free speech campus debates is a recognition though that free speech is a value, but it's not the ultimate value. The ultimate value of a university is truth, right? Like your job at this institution is to generate new truth about the universe, right? And free speech is one of the essential preconditions. And the second that you start shutting people down, not based upon the merit of their argument, because of the ideological flavor of their position, you compromise and jeopardize that truth generating function, right? Yeah. Or in a lot of places, they're capable of generating new truth, but only within a very, very narrow band of knowledge, because large portions of reality have just been rendered untouchable because you might generate a truth that doesn't fit the kind of dominant ideological narrative. That's right. So like either you're not generating truth, like the average anthropology or comparative literature department, all they generate is masturbatory word salads, or you know, you work in the biology department, but there's large chunks of the human experience that you do not get to investigate. And if you do investigate, you're going to end up on the front page of Drudge for getting fired. Yeah, you just don't get to touch.
So let me ask this question real quick. So because I want to be descriptive for the audience and not just say, oh, well, we're talking about free speech shutting down, and then you've got somebody maybe like at Princeton or something like that, and they're like, we don't shut down free speech. What are you talking about? That's another right-wing talking point. So in your documentary, what is one of the most shocking examples of this taking place on college universities that you guys uncovered?
Well, I mean, I think for the second episode of Silence U Part 2, in Silence U Part 2 in the Silence U series, the anecdote that we investigate is that very famous viral incident of a Yale undergraduate shouting down a distinguished professor out on the Yale campus. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it turns out that she was yelling at him because of a controversy stemming from guidance that had been provided by the university related to Halloween costumes.
So again, this is Christakis, right?
Right, Christakis. I don't want to. There's no need. Like, if people are interested in the particulars of this case, they should just watch the documentary.
Okay.
But that was an incident in which like a small group of professors said that undergraduates at Yale University ought to be treated like adults who are capable of occasionally seeing something or hearing something that they're offended by. And the administrative apparatus, the administrative leviathan at Yale, saying under no circumstances should you be treating undergraduates like adults. These are children. These are babies. We need to protect their sensitive souls. And we are going to impose all sorts of micromanaging rules and regulations on their behavior and their speech in order to protect them from these evil, traumatic ideas. But that incident also, again, as part of what we talked about at the very beginning, part of the way we tell that story, though, is right around the 7-minute mark. We do a turn, and we kind of we reveal that there's an even deeper scandal than what people think happened in that courtyard, and that scandal is related to what elite educational institutions have devolved into over the last 30 to 40 years. What services exactly are they providing consumers? And they're not exactly the services that I think a lot of outside observers guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So now this is where I wanted to take just a little bit of time to kind of turn it around and say, all right, so we tried to be descriptive about the increasing growth of the executive branch of the government with the very obvious cases of lying, specifically in some of the cases we gave with the media, and then also with things that are going on in the academy. And so we see this consistent kind of erosion of these institutions. And so my question to you is where is it coming from? Because this is what I spend hours of my life away from my kids and my wife wondering about and thinking about and contemplating. Where is this increased desire for diversity quotas coming from? Where is the silencing of free speech on college campuses coming from? Where are the outright lies of the media, many that seemed aimed at stoking racial animosity? Where is it coming from? Where is the revisionist history coming from that's being taught in public schools through the guise of CRT? And even the patently unscientific discussion of gender in some of these schools as early as elementary. Now, so I would call all of those things, I would say, fall under the umbrella of when we use the term the woke movement. I would say those things all and more make up what the woke movement is. So I'm going to give you my thoughts, and then you can certainly react to those, and then I want to hear what you think. And so I think there are three symptoms, but one cause. And so the symptoms are as follows: neo-Marxism, postmodernism, and identity politics. I think these ideologies are stoking a lot of what's happening in society today and creating many of the things that are the worst parts of who we are as a society today, cancel culture and all the like, and all the other things that I just mentioned. But I think that there's something underneath all of that. And what's underneath all of that is an existential crisis, a crisis of meaning that's taking place in the hearts and the minds of people. And I think that ultimately comes from the fact that we are increasingly becoming a post-Christian West and a post-Christian America. And there used to be a sense in which we derived our values and our sense of meaning and our sense of purpose from something transcendent. And now we are looking to institutions for what used to take the place of God, and maybe even people within those institutions to replace God. And what we're finding more and more and more is that those things are crumbling to the ground because they are not sufficient foundation for us to stand on. Now, I'll just be fully transparent and say a lot of that comes because I'm an evangelical Christian. A lot of that comes because I believe in God. I believe that there is a source, an all-knowing source, a creator being that put us here on this planet on purpose for a purpose. But nonetheless, I think even if people are listening and they disagree with that perspective, they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is God in the flesh, come to wake people up. The one thing that we have to realize is that we are recognizing a shift the further we move away from those principles that were an undergirding part of the foundation of this nation, irrefutably. The more we move away from that, I think I just have that simple question of how we doing now? How you like me now? I mean, as we move away from those things, is it making us better or worse? And then if you say, even if you don't believe in God, if you say that we are worse now than we were maybe 20 years ago in terms of kind of the cultural fabric, the social fabric of our nation, then perhaps you have to start calling a spade and realize it might be because we're moving further away from these fundamental truths that have girded our nation for such a long time.
I mean, as a pretty thoroughgoing atheist, it's uncomfortable for me how much I agree with a lot of what you just said. Not everything. I'm not going to endorse it in its entirety. But I mean, part of what's made me push me away from like the standard issue libertarianism that I kind of subscribed to when I was in my 20s to a more kind of hardy conservatism in my 30s is the recognition that the American experiment is not just about maximizing individual liberty, like you read the founders, and that has to be paired with individual virtue. It only works if there's individual virtue. Mm-hmm. And you need virtue generating and cultivating institutions. And for America, that happen to be historically the Christian church, regardless of whether or not the metaphysical claims of the church are true, right? Mm-hmm. You need to have virtue cultivating institutions. Virtue, and that also includes parents and communities, which have also been shredded. And sometimes they've been shredded because of market forces, which makes it even a little bit more complicated in terms of like exactly what I think about economic policy. So I'm going to say there's very smart friends of mine. Basically, there's the kind of like, there's the, for wokeness right now, capturing all these institutions and potentially threatening the American project. There's the ideological explanation. There's ideas that people got soaked in that they really believe that they're pursuing. There is the kind of technological explanation, which is some of it is just a function of rapid technological change that maybe the human brain is not quite ready for, that leads to all sorts of destabilizing psychological effects that are kind of undergirding. Sure. And then there's the third bucket, though, which is how much of this is just market-based capitalism, that for whatever reason, it's become profitable to boost woke, and companies are going to continue to do that, even if they don't actually believe in the ideas, even if they don't know who Michel Foucault is. It doesn't matter to them. They just realize that if you propagate his ideas during the halftime show of the NBA, people like it and buy the sneakers. How much of it is each one of those? I do want to say, though, I have very smart friends of mine that disagree with me in terms of how much emphasis ought to be put on each one of those buckets. I don't want to downplay, though, the technological explanation in terms of rapid, like obviously in some ways, rapid technological progress has been good because it's enabled the existence of my company. Like I do appreciate that. But at the same time, it's also resulted in us putting Instagram equipped smartphones in the pockets of 12-year-old girls. Which I think has catastrophic psychological effects, right?
So I know you're not talking specifically about social media, but social media obviously plays a huge role in that.
And also, and like, so it's like, and social media has a bajillion, consequences that I'm not smart enough to be able to comprehend. But like, I do think also social media in a smartphone, meaning it's always accessible. It follows you everywhere. You can never escape from it. Can have really bad psychological effects. It can make people miserable and lonely and depressed. And then they, for whatever reason, think that there's a political solution to their psychological problems, right? Like, I'm lonely and depressed and anxious. The solution for this is some grand woke project that gets Trump out of office.
This goes back to my belief about God too. So you're probably going to reject this, but I think we're replacing God with technology in some ways too. So like I think there's an aspect in social media where God's been replaced with the like button. So now we understand reality based upon what other people tell us is good. And so I think that there's some social conditioning aspects of that are really, really dangerous as well that I think are playing part.
Well, well, what you mean is we have taken away God and we've replaced him with the false God of the self. That's what it is. It's people now, they don't have the traditional transcendent that will force them to kind of overcome the ego. Now they've been fed this script, which is happiness is just about feeding the ego. And sometimes that's through social media likes, that's through just indulging any craving you have whenever you have it. And it's about, and also rejecting anything that might in the moment restrict your freedom, restrict your individual liberty, restrict your ability to like indulge your cravings whenever you feel them, right? Whether or not that's like the biological reality of gender, or it's things like a marriage, right? Or I should have more examples than that in my brain, but like things that maybe in the moment increase unfreedom, but over the long term make you care about something other than yourself, right? Yeah. And that a lot of people are operating under the faulty script that the way to happiness is the indulgence of the ego as opposed to the transcendence of the ego, which for most people through most of history, that transcendence has come through traditional religious institutions. It has, or through community that makes demands on you that you don't just like, you got to get off you got to get off Instagram because the grandma down the street needs her driveway plowed, right? And a lot of that stuff has been dissolving away, and people are left just to titillate the ego indefinitely on screens, and it's driving them insane. Yeah. So I guess I do want to say that I think as much as a lot of our project is about persuasion, political persuasion, trying to make videos that persuade people of particular positions, there's also ways in which a lot of the problems that are now infecting America don't have political solutions. It's actually has like physical solutions. Like people just need to get off of their phones. They need to get regular exercise. They need to properly hydrate, and they need to have face-to-face conversations with good friends. That honestly, regardless of what their politics are, if you just replaced 20 hours of screen time with regular physical exercise, sleeping properly, hydrating properly, and face-to-face interaction with good friends that aren't mediated by screens, you would solve at least 70% of the political dysfunction in this country.
I totally
right?
agree.
Right. Like, and I mean that, and that, like, there's plenty of political dysfunction on the right as well. I mean, I don't like the cult of, obviously, given the documentary we talked about, I don't like the cult of personality that infects a guy like Trump. I don't like it. I think it's unhealthy and disgusting. And like, there's plenty of dysfunction on the right as well. And a lot of that stuff that was not going to be solved through proper political persuasion. It's like people actually realizing they're an embodied human being that has needs that are not being met because they're too busy posting memes on Facebook.
Yeah, I would just say this. I think a lot of that comes from just having a purpose. And what I think is like almost unfortunately revelatory for some people is that purpose should have nothing to do with what other people do. And what I mean by that is like, endorse and encourage what other people are doing. But I think sometimes we've mistaken shutting people down as a purpose, or what other people are doing that we don't like is now our purpose. Your purpose should come from something else other than what other people are doing. It should come from inside, and it should come from something things that you're passionate about. Because I really do think if we were busy doing things that were actually constructive, we would have so little time for deconstruction.
And this is why people should have kids.
Yeah, it definitely takes up some time.
Like if you're having a hard time in your 20s transcending the ego and finding something outside of yourself to care about, just have kids. That stuff will happen real quick, whether or not you want it to happen. Like it's particularly for men, I think it's a way that just like reality forces you to transcend your ego, whether you want to or not. Because like that diaper is not getting changed if you don't change it, bro. Jeez. Like that screaming baby is not going to go back to sleep unless you comfort the baby and the baby goes back to sleep. Like it makes you. And I say this as someone who is like a pretty good dad, but has plenty of room for improvement, but that I regularly feel it making me become a better person who transcends my ego, that I probably in ways that I wouldn't do if I didn't have kids. It's like,
well, I think you're 100% right there. My only reservation there is that unfortunately, because of how invasive the woke movement is, it's also invaded the mind of parents, and now parents are using their kids for virtue signaling. And so you see this in terms of like this woman that just posted a TikTok video about her son being a bully. Instead of actually going to discipline her son, she's outing her son as a bully in front of the TikTok world and getting millions of views. And then
it's almost like she cares more about boosting her own brand than actually letting her, like, helping her son,
like being a damn parent. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll stick to my guns and say that wherever the woke movement is, and if God is a solution for it, then all the better. But
okay.
But I just know that if we continue at pace, I think we definitely will. Or we're looking at two different Americas and an increased sense of polarization, an increased sense of distrust in institutions, which I think will drive an increased sense of despair. And as pessimistic as that sounds, maybe perhaps that's good, because it will help us wake up and realize that we need to start reevaluating our value system here in America and beyond.
I mean, there's some people who appear to not be bothered by the prospect of a cleaving of America. I think that would be a tragedy of unimaginable,
I agree,
epic proportions. That I think America is. I buy a lot of the kind of cringy July 4th patriotic exceptionalism stuff. I mean, the more the world you see, the more you're likely to endorse that conception of America, that you begin to forgive us some of our flaws, given how societies are structured, man. How much oppression and racism and sexism and violence and tribal violence and domination and corruption are like the base level are the base level experience of most humans in most society throughout the course of history. And you're like, wow, it's pretty miraculous what we've been able to achieve here. And but though, for me, again, this is why part of the reason America is miraculous is because of things like its diversity, and because of the fact that it is hospitable to people of many different creeds and faiths. But everybody comes together, though, to endorse some of the basic foundational tenets of the American project. And where stuff gets dangerous is when people that have a lot of money and influence and followers start attacking those base level foundational characteristics of the American experiment. That's where you're like, oh, this is not great. This is not great. Dude, this is not going to work out well. Because in times past, if you look at the 60s, the critiques of the foundations of America came from the shaggy-haired fringe, right? Like, there are plenty of people going on extended monologues about America just being a thinly cloaked white supremacist conspiracy. But those people didn't have any power. And most of the time they were being rejected by and critiqued by the power. The difference now is that the people that are going on the extended monologues about America being this irredeemable white supremacist conspiracy are the ones that have the power, literally have the power in the White House, or have the power of influence in the New York Times. Like, that's where it's like, this is not great. It's not great. The people that we trust to tell us the story about ourselves are telling us a story about our own irredeemable evil. It's not great. Not great.
And then the conspiracy doesn't become the conspiracy anymore when those people actually have the power to kind of re-engineer things. All right, so we'll probably tackle most of the world's issues when you come back, hopefully in the future, and announce the project that you're working on.
I'll definitely pass it along. Happy to talk to you about it.
Okay, awesome. So I look forward to doing that. Before I let you go, though, I just want to say fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your heart. I appreciate you being willing to come on and the hard work that you're doing. I don't want people to miss it. So help my audience know, and I will put everything that you're about to mention and more down in the description, but help us know how we can follow you and how we can see the work that you're doing.
Yeah, the best way, if you just go to goodkidproductions.com, you'll see all our stuff. And the very first thing on there is a link to our YouTube page. So people should go check out our stuff. And if they like it, they ought to subscribe. They should tell their friends. We're trying to build a baller audience of people that like the stuff that we're making. So goodkidproductions.com. And then if they want to go, just directly to one of the videos, they can also just go to KanyeWestwing.us. That URL still works. KanyeWestwing.us will take you to what is the kind of tentpole founding cornerstone documentary of our YouTube page, which is this, I think, contrarian defense of Kanye West's run for president last year.
Okay, awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for everything you're doing, and thanks for being on today.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate it, man. Do pass it along once it comes out.
Absolutely. And everybody, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift
by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.